Today, the iter built-in function in Python 3. So let's start with a look at the docs. Iter takes one mandatory and one optional argument. And what's interesting is it says that the first argument is interpreted very differently depending on the presence of the second argument. Without the second argument, we can pass any iterable to the iter function. But with the second argument, which is called the sentinel, then the object must be a callable object. So again, if you only pass the mandatory object, it can be any iterator. And if you do pass the sentinel, then your object needs to be callable. We're going to run through both these situations, first with only the first argument, and then secondly, we'll look at it with both arguments. All right, so let's start with my favorite example of the string hey. So what we get returned is a string iterator object. And if we wanted to make that a list, we'll get a list iterator object. Or if you wanted to make it a set, we'll get a set iterator object. However, if we did, say, 1, what do you think is going to happen? We're going to get a type error because the int object is not iterable. So just keep in mind that we need to pass something that's iterable to the iter function. Next, let's assign that to a variable. So we'll do iter, we'll do a list with some strings. So we'll do hey, Python, and car. And we'll throw a number in here, so 100. So that's our list iterator object. So in other tutorials, what I see people do is this. They use the next built-in function, which is separate, but they both kind of work together. And they'll do A, and look. So what's happening? So we're basically iterating over our iterator object. We have hey, then we have Python, then we have car, and then we have 100. But what's going to happen when we run this again? We're going to get an error. Specifically, it's called stop iteration. And basically, there's just nothing left in our iterator to iterate over. So we get a stop iteration error. And keep that in mind because it'll come up again when we look at iter with that secondary argument. So now let's look at iter with our secondary argument. So again, we can run this and get our string iterator object. And if we add that secondary argument of, let's say, 5, we're going to get an error saying that v, or that first argument, needs to be callable. So what you could do is do type hey, and now we have our callable iterator work fine, no error, because to verify, if we cast callable around this, that's true. Type is callable, so we're good to go. And so that's an error people run into. They'll try to do iterator and do like a little list here, like they'll do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they'll run into errors because this is not callable. So obviously a lot of things are callable, but the main thing I see people do is they'll do iter and they'll do my function, and then they'll have their, my sentinel. And so that's what you're going to see a lot of the times is a function as that first argument and then the sentinel. So what is that sentinel? Well, let's look at some quick examples. So here's an example of the iter with a function called x and then a sentinel of 5. And just to kind of define it real quick, a sentinel I think of as like a stopper. So basically this is going to stop when it hits 5. And our function is just returning any random number from 1 to 100, and when it hits 5, it's going to stop. So run this with iter, and it stopped. We hit that stop iteration error, and that's pretty much it. So it ran through a whole bunch of numbers between 1 and 100, and that's just kind of how long it took to get to 5. And we can make this smaller to make it a little more digestible. And, we got to 5 a little bit faster, and then we hit our sentinel, our number 5. Or we could put this 1 to 5, right? So we'll get to it real quick, hopefully, or never, because we need 6 here. And we got to it on the very first go. We got to it on the 6th go, etc. So I think you get that idea. Right here, we're getting this big stop iteration error, but we could put a try except block around this. So let's do this. I'll clear this, make a little bit more room, and we're going to replace this with a try except block. And when we run this, we get something a little more appealing. We're not going to get that error because it's in an except block. We print it out, we have our callable iterator object, and then we break. All right, so that's one example. And now let's look at another one. So here in this example, we have a for loop with iter, and basically what we're going to do is stop every time it hits 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, stop. We can run it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, stop. 1, 2, 3, 4, stop. And if we made this, say, 10, what's going to happen? We're going to get to 9 every time. And so that's just another thing you can do. Basically, the sentinel is the value that you are going to stop on, and it's going to hit that stop iteration exception. Now, one last thing. Here in the docs, there's an example of using iter to basically read from a database file. I have a similar example where I have Alice in Wonderland, the whole text from the whole book, and we're going to read that, and then we're going to stop when we get to the end using iter, and then whenever we get to the empty string, we'll stop. The idea is it's looping over every line until that empty string is reached. And what we'll do here is show you a little sneak peek of the book. So that's how you can use iter to kind of iterate over a text file.